Hi, thank you so much for joining me. Today we're going to read Stuart Little by E.B. White, Pictures by Garth Williams. I hope you'll take a moment to like and subscribe to my channel. We're going to begin with chapters 1 and 2. Chapter 1, In the Drain. When Miss Frederick C. Little's second son arrived, everybody noticed that he was not much bigger than a mouse. The truth of the matter was, the baby looked very much like a mouse in every way. He was only about 2 inches high. He had a mouse's sharp nose, a mouse's tail, a mouse's whiskers, and the pleasant, shy manner of a mouse. Before he was many days old, he was not only looking like a mouse, but acting like one too, wearing a gray hat and carrying a small cane. Mr. and Mrs. Little named him Stuart, and Mr. Little made him a tiny bed out of 4 clothespins and a cigarette box. Unlike most babies, Stuart could walk as soon as he was born. When he was a week old, he could climb lamps by shinnying up the cord. Miss Little saw right away that the infant clothes she had provided were unsuitable, and she set to work and made a fine little blue worsted suit with patch pockets in which he could keep his handkerchief, his money, and his keys. Every morning before Stuart dressed, Mrs. Little went to his room and weighed him on a small scale which was really meant for weighing letters. At birth, Stuart could have been sent by first-class mail for 3 cents, but his parents preferred to keep him rather than send him away, and when at the age of a month he had gained only a third of an ounce, his mother was so worried she sent for a doctor. The doctor was delighted with Stuart and said that it was very unusual for an American family to have a mouse. He took Stuart's temperature and found that it was 98.6, which is normal for a mouse. He also examined Stuart's chest and heart and looked into his ears solemnly with a flashlight. Not every doctor can look into a mouse's ears without laughing. Everything seemed to be all right, and Mrs. Little was pleased to get such a good report. "Feed him up," said the doctor cheerfully as he left. The home of the Little family was a pleasant place near a park in New York City. In the morning the sun streamed in through the east window, and all the Littles were up early as a general rule. Stuart was a great help to his parents and to his older brother George because of his small size and because he could do things that a mouse can do and was agreeable about doing them. One day Mrs. Little was washing out the bathtub after Mr. Little had taken a bath. She lost a ring off her finger and was horrified to discover it had fallen down the drain. "What had I better do?" she cried, trying to keep the tears back. "If I were you," said George, "I should bend a hairpin in the shape of a fishhook and tie it onto the piece of a string and try and fish the ring out with it." So Miss Little found her a piece of string and a hairpin, and for about a half an hour she fished for the ring. But it was dark down the drain, and the hook always seemed to catch on something before she could get it down to where the ring was. "What luck?" inquired Mr. Little, coming into the bathroom. "No luck at all," said Mrs. Little. "The ring is so far down I can't fish it up." "Why don't we send Stuart down after it?" suggested Mr. Little. "How about it, Stuart? Would you like to try?" "Yes, I would," Stuart replied, "but I think I better get into my old pants. I imagine it's wet down there." "It's all of that," said George, a trifle annoyed that his hook idea hadn't worked. So Stuart slipped into his old pants and prepared to go down the drain after the ring. He decided to carry the string along with him, leaving one end in charge of his father. "When I jerk 3 times on the string, pull me up," he said. And while Mr. Little knelt in the tub, Stuart slid easily down the drain and was lost to view. In a minute or so there came 3 quick jerks on the string, and Mr. Little carefully hauled it up. There at the end was Stuart, with the ring safely around his neck. "Oh, my brave little son," said Miss Little proudly as she kissed Stuart and thanked him. "How was it down there?" asked Mr. Little, who was always curious to know about places he had never been to. "It was all right," said Stuart, but the truth was the drain made him very slimy, and it was necessary for him to take a bath and sprinkle himself with a bit of his mother's violet water before he felt himself again. Everybody in the family thought he had been awfully good about the whole thing. Chapter 2: Home Problems. Stuart was also helpful when it came to ping pong. The littles liked ping pong, but the balls had a way of rolling under chairs, sofas, and radiators, and this meant that the players were forever stooping down and reaching under things. Stuart soon learned to chase balls, and it was a great sight to see him come out from under a hot radiator, pushing a ping pong ball with all his might, the perspiration rolling down his cheeks. The ball, of course, was almost as high as he was, and he had to throw his whole weight against it in order to keep it rolling. The Littles had a grand piano in their living room, which was all right except that one of the keys was a sticky key and didn't work properly. Mrs. Little said she thought it must be the damp weather, but I don't see how it could be the damp weather, for the key had been sticking for about 4 years, during which time there had been many bright, clear days. But anyway, the key stuck, and was a great inconvenience to anyone trying to play the piano. It bothered George particularly when he was playing the scarf dance, which was rather lively. It was George who had the idea of stationing Stuart inside the piano to push the key up the second it was played. This was no easy job for Stuart, as he had to crouch down between the felt hammers so that he wouldn't get hit on the head. But Stuart liked it just the same. It was exciting inside the piano, dodging about, and the noise was terrific. Sometimes after a long session he would emerge quite deaf, as though he had just stepped out of an airplane after a long journey. And it would be some little time before he really felt normal again. Mr. and Mrs. Little often discussed Stuart quietly between themselves when he wasn't around, for they had never quite recovered from the shock and surprise of having a mouse in the family. He was so very tiny and presented so many problems to his parents. Mr. Little said that, for one thing, there must be no references made to mice in their conversations. He made Mrs. Little tear from the nursery songbook the page about 3 blind mice, see how they run. I don't want Stuart to get a lot of notions in his head, said Mr. Little. I should feel badly to have my son growing up in fear that a farmer's wife was going to cut off his tail with a carving knife. It is such things that make children dream bad dreams when they go to bed at night. Yes, replied Miss Little, and I think we had better start thinking about the poem, "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse." I think it might embarrass Stuart to hear a mice mentioned in such a belittling manner. That's right, said her husband, but what shall we say when we come to that line in the poem? We'll have to say something. We can't just say, "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring." That doesn't sound complete. It needs a word to rhyme with house. What about louse? Asked Mrs. Little. Or grouse, said Mr. Little. I suggest souse, remarked George, who had been listening to the conversation from across the room. It was decided that louse was the best substitute for mouse. And so when Christmas came around, Mrs. Little carefully rubbed out the word mouse from the poem and wrote in the word louse. And Stuart always thought that the poem went this way. "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a louse." The thing that worried Mr. Little most was the mouse hole in the pantry. This hole had been made by some mice in the days before the Littles came to live in the house, and nothing had been done about stopping it up. Mr. Little was not all sure that he understood Stuart's real feelings about a mouse hole. He didn't know where the hole led to, and it made him uneasy to think that Stuart might some day feel the desire to venture into it. "After all, he does look a good deal like a mouse," said Mr. Little to his wife, "and I've never seen a mouse yet that didn't like to go into a hole." Thanks for reading with me today. Take a minute to like and subscribe, and I will meet you at the video for chapter 3 and 4.